Welcome back to CCSSO's special event, State Leadership for Student Outcomes. So now we're going to jump back into content here with a session on literacy. Literacy is key to any comprehensive strategy to improve student outcomes. CCSSO has grounded our evidence-based approach to supporting state leaders in our report, A Nation of Readers. And if you haven't had a chance to dig into this report, I encourage you to check out the QR code here and download A Nation of Readers. We are fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Antoinette Mitchell, who is the State Superintendent for the District of Columbia. DC has enviable student growth results. And Dr. Mitchell is going to share an overview of their work in DC and how they've achieved those results. She'll be also joined by leaders from an LEA and 2 schools to share concretely about what implementation looks like from their vantage. With that, in addition to Dr. Mitchell, I am pleased to introduce Elizabeth Ross, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning in the DC Office of the State Superintendent, Mary Pendleton, Senior Director of Program at DC Prep, Dana Jones, English Language Arts, Assistant Principal at DC Prep Benning Elementary Campus, and Kevin O'Quinn, the ELA Assistant Principal at DC Prep Benning Middle Campus. Please welcome all of our presenters to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. What a pleasure it is for me to be before you this morning, and thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for joining us today, whether you're in the room or online. I'd like to begin with a video that shows literacy education in action. Check out what's happening at DC Prep, one of our local charter schools.
Now everybody, let's tap it out. Great. So you're putting each of your sounds, you're putting them all together, and that is called blending. It's called blending. Very good.
All right. Go ahead and put the towels back. Put the towels back. Put the towels back. Let's see. So close. What's the final sound? Act. Does this say t? Let me make it say chat. What letter do we change to make it say chat? T. Good. Go ahead and put that S back and swap it out with that T.
Good job. What about it? Sit. Good.
Hi there. My name is Corinne Hood, and welcome to first grade in Pepperdine. Come on in. Personally, one of my favorite areas is the classroom. This is our classroom library. Our library is filled with many level books that will be on a level for every single student. Yes, building all those amazing foundational reading skills throughout the year.
Great. DC Prep. What struck me about that video is that just in a few minutes, we saw so much. We saw phonics and phonemic awareness. We saw vocabulary. We saw reading, engagement. We saw instructional materials. I could go on and on. But this is why we are here today, to ensure that students are engaged in learning every day, all the time. For those of us who traveled to this conference from far away, welcome to Washington, D.C. I actually grew up here. I went to school here, and I taught here. Education actually runs in my family. My mother, who will turn 101 next month, my mom taught literacy in this city for 32 years. I both experienced and witnessed her dedication, her passion, her caring, her skill set, and her artistry. These are all of the ingredients that make good teaching. She shaped so much of what I understand about teaching, about reading, and about what children deserve in the classroom. Those experiences guide how I think about our efforts to make more learning possible for every child in every classroom every day. In DC, we have just under 100,000 students who are diverse in race and ethnicity, diverse in socioeconomic backgrounds, and diverse in home languages. In DC, we have about 68 square miles of land, and we also have about 68 really independent LEAs. But we have all come together around several key pillars of a statewide literacy strategy. We have been able to move from recovery to results. We are beginning to see our literacy strategy yield real student growth. It is my pleasure to talk with you today about how DC has made this happen. DC is a unique place to lead public education. I know the one thing that all states have in common is that we all think that we are unique. But really, DC is unique, trust me. First, there is guidance. DC is a city that carries state-level responsibilities through the agency I lead, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, a nod to DC statehood. We are an SEA, but we also have county and local responsibilities, as well as higher ed and early learning. We are also a city under mayoral control. We have a citywide school board, and we have city council, which controls our budget. So public education here is closely watched, and our elected leaders are deeply engaged in our work in schools. This, I have learned, on any given day, can be both a blessing and a curse. The partnership, though, has been quite amazing, and we have needed everybody to make things work. This level of attention shapes how we lead and how we work across the system. Excuse me. Second is choice. Choice is also a very defining part of public education in Washington, D.C. We are essentially a 50-50 city with students learning across DC public schools, which is our largest LEA, and our public charter schools. I joked earlier about the number of public charter schools that we have, but this actually means that we have an incredible set of system and school leaders who are all dedicated to improving education in our city. So when we set a literacy strategy, it has to work across both sectors. It has to be clear, it has to be practical, and it has to make sense in very different school models. The third element of our landscape is educator stability. Stronger instruction depends on teachers and school leaders who remain long enough to deepen their practice and build consistency. Over the last 5 years, DC has consistently retained teachers at rates of 80% or higher, and that continuity has greatly supported the implementation of our literacy work. When I talk about DC today, I am describing a system with an active governance, with genuine choice, and with growing educator stability. All of this shapes how we move forward. Before I go into results, I want to pause and acknowledge something important. What I just described, how DC is structured, how choice works here, and the stability we've built among educators, these are not a magic formula, and they are not the only prerequisites for success. Every state and district operates with its own pressures and opportunities. And even without some of the elements we have in DC, what matters is that you have enough stability and coherence in your context for strong state work to take hold. And in DC, that stability and coherence have started to yield results. In 2025, the District of Columbia saw the strongest year-over-year gains in ELA and math since the pandemic. ELA proficiency reached its highest point on record. Our 4-year graduation rate rose more than 2.5 points, And I'm proud to say that the driver of that increase was African American males. We saw a 7 percentage point increase in the graduation rates of African American males. And as I mentioned earlier, educator retention remains strong. And these factors are interconnected. Schools stay steady when educators stay. When schools are steady, instruction becomes more consistent. And when instruction is consistent, student progress becomes possible. And you begin to see improvement across multiple indicators at once. All of that groundwork matters when you apply it to something essential. And in DC, that something has been literacy, where the connection between system stability and student learning becomes clearest. Now, if we look specifically at literacy, the gains are showing up across grade bands. Since 2019, ELA proficiency rates have risen. In grades 3 through 5, we had a 28% proficiency rate in 2019, and we've moved to a 35% proficiency rate in 2025. In grades 6 through 8, we've moved from 32% proficiency to 48% proficiency. And in grades 9 through 12, we've moved from 33% to 35%. And this all matters for two reasons. First, when we see improvement in elementary, middle, and high school, it shows that recovery and improvement can be broad. And second, our progress is more than anecdotal and shows up clearly in our data. If you step back further, the Education Recovery Scorecard found that between 2022 and 2024, DC ranked first among states in math recovery and first in reading recovery. The progress is real. Thank you for that. The progress is real, and it makes clear that the system is moving in the right direction. This is why I opened with the video. These gains are connected to what students are experiencing in classrooms every day. So a natural question might be, what has helped DC make the literacy progress? And for us, three things came together. First, the Literacy Task Force. This citywide cross-sector group put state leaders, public and public charter schools, and city partners, including politicians and nonprofits, into the same conversation. It helped everyone build a shared sense of what strong literacy work looks like and what schools would need to do to make it happen. The second driver is legislation. The laws that passed created a solid framework for student screening, for intervention, for high-quality instructional materials, and science-based reading support. They offered steady, practical guidance for how schools could organize and strengthen their work. And the third factor was funding. We invested in the work through local dollars, through COVID relief funds, and through our comprehensive literacy state development grant. That funding meant having quality materials, it meant high quality professional development, and it meant high impact tutoring. It created time. It allowed schools to free up teachers for professional learning. It allowed them to carve out space for teams to plan, to review and to use data, and to strengthen instruction. Together, these three elements, the task force, the legislation, and the funding, created conditions for DC's literacy progress. The next part of our story is how that work took shape on the ground. Effective state strategy means changing what students and teachers experience in schools. To bring our state literacy work into focus at the school level, I'd like to introduce to you DC Prep. DC Prep is a local charter network that has grown steadily over the past 20 years. They are seeing meaningful results, including a 16-point gain in ELA at one of their campuses last year. I think that deserves a round of applause. Our moderator for this conversation is DC Prep is Elizabeth Ross. Elizabeth serves as the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at OSSI. Elizabeth leads the work to turn state strategy into action. Her team partners with schools to ensure educators have the tools, the training, and the support to deliver effective literacy instruction. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much for that warm intro, Dr. Mitchell. It's wonderful to be here, and even a greater privilege and a greater pleasure to be sitting alongside colleagues and friends that every single day are leading critical work to increase student literacy and student learning across DC. As Dr. Mitchell shared, my name is Elizabeth Ross. I am lucky enough to lead our Division of Teaching and Learning at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. And this work is not just a professional highlight for me, but also a personal one, because I've been in DC for the better part of 3 decades now and started my career here in the early 2000s teaching 3rd grade. I was taught to teach students how to read under a balanced literacy approach. And it's my goal, and I'm privileged enough to sit in a role now where I can help ensure that no teacher in DC is left without the knowledge and skills of science of reading and structured literacy, so that every single teacher can move the needle for students in student learning across literacy as well as across math. As I shared, I'm very privileged to be joined by the group from DC Prep this morning, including Mary Pendleton, our Senior Director of Program. Mary Pendleton has been at DC Prep for about a decade. She oversees DC Prep's literacy and social studies programs, and she spent her early days as an ELA curriculum writer, so we're very glad to have her here. I'm also delighted to be joined by Dr. Dana Jones, who's an ELA Assistant Principal at DC Prep Benning Road Elementary Campus, as well as by Kevin O'Quinn, who's our ELA Assistant Principal of DC Prep Benning Road, DC Prep Benning Road Middle School Campus. And with that, we have about 12 minutes and some really good questions for our panelists. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into those questions. Mary, my first question is for you this morning. I would love you to talk a bit more broadly for the audience about what literacy implementation has looked like at DC Prep. What have you done to get to this point in your implementation?
Yeah, so I think there were several pivotal points over the last several years. I, like most of us, tend to anchor in pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID. But all of those points really were driven by data. Every decision that we made was grounded in, are we getting outcomes for families? Are we fulfilling our promise to preppies, as we call them, our students, our families? And when we're not, how do we evaluate our programming, our staffing, our curriculum, to make sure it is in service of getting literacy outcomes? I think another thing that we have really spent a lot of time doing is really ensuring that any programmatic shift that we make, any staffing shift, is grounded in the research, in what the science of reading says is true around how the brain learns how to read. And I think it's also important to mention all of that was done alongside our staff and families and every stakeholder group. DC Prep is very intentional around doing task forces, listening sessions, pilot groups, and ensuring that we're partnering with families and staff, ensuring that we are doing the work alongside them and not, we don't lead the charge. We don't make decisions without the investment of our key stakeholders, and every literacy decision we've made has really been grounded in that belief that we have to plan with and not for.
Thank you so much, Mary. I love hearing about the relationship between the engagement that you're doing with educators, with families, in order to bring your policies and your vision to life. That's incredibly powerful. Another powerful leader on the stage, Kevin O'Quinn, this next question is coming for you. You're leading a middle school campus. In your work in this space, I'd love to hear you talk about what the implementation of high-quality instructional materials has looked like and what supports you're instituting to help your leaders, to help your educators in implementing those high-quality instructional materials with fidelity.
Thank you. I think the first thing that was really important is taking time to make sure that leaders really understood the science of reading and structured literacy. And so there was a lot of work over the past few summers bringing in certain outside groups like literacy architects to train leaders to make sure that we had a very clear understanding of what needed to be done. Even having the ability to go into summer school classes and teach those students, so we had the experience. So when it was time to be in front of teachers and train them, we were speaking from a place of experience and knowledge. And that was incredibly helpful for us as we tried to implement these structured literacy like foundational reading interventions for our students. And so using programs like HD Word or M-Class intervention from Amplify, we really had to understand why we were doing it, what was the designer's intent behind those programs, so that way when we were in front of students, we were able to deliver the instruction to the best of our ability. Then being able to use DIBELS to progress monitor, to probe, to figure out exactly what gaps existed for students was incredibly helpful for our work. So that way, when we were meeting with teachers, Dana and I meet with teachers every week in our collaborative planning meetings to look at data, to look at the progress monitoring, to say, what is effective right now, what gaps are we closing, and what gaps still exist. And that's really been transformational because teachers are invested in their students' outcomes. They feel really attached to what those scores are because they understand the science of reading, they understand what those numbers mean, they understand all of those different programmatic implementation, like the minutia of it. And so when they get in front of students, they feel really responsible for that. And it's just had a great impact on our teachers and our students.
I love that, Kevin. I heard shared responsibility, I heard data, I heard a singular vision that everyone in the school district, in the school building, in the classroom is working towards. Really, really powerful. Going back to that resources point, one of my primary jobs in DC is making sure that the school leaders and the system leaders that I'm sitting alongside have the resources and supports that you need in order to implement a high quality instructional materials, strong literacy practices with fidelity. As Dr. Mitchell described, we've been doing this work in partnership with our DC LEAs for years. Dr. Mitchell mentioned the Literacy Task Force report. We launched that report at DC Prep a number of years ago and have used it in order to drive lots of system-wide resources and supports and its successes across our district. We also think a lot about fundraising, about how we can strategically leverage federal funds, local funds, and private philanthropic funds in order to move the needle for our students. We've also used those funds strategically in order to develop resources, toolkits, things like this. Mary, I'd love to hear from you. We've been partnering together for many years. Where have our supports been most impactful, and where would you like to see us go in the future as we continue to work together?
I would say there have been several points over the last few years, especially as we've made really intentional shifts around our assessment suite, our programming, our curriculum, that has been grounded in a lot of the work that OSSI has provided. I think about the rubrics that have been used that help us kind of make really intentional decisions around what are we adopting? Where are we making changes in what we're using? And is it actually the best decision for us that is also grounded in the research? The task force that OSSI led, which I was lucky enough to be a part of, was really helpful. I think being in a space with people from across the city in making some really important decisions around if we are requiring people to adopt, what has to be true of that process, what has to be true of adoption approval lists, et cetera. And I think the third thing that comes to mind is the CLSD grant, which was mentioned earlier. Those grants have really allowed us to purchase things like decodables, work with literacy architects to make sure our leaders are deeply knowledgeable about the science of reading and can turnkey that knowledge to teachers, as well as purchasing HQIM. I think looking forward in terms of things that come to mind, I think that development continues to be top of mind for us and making sure that our teachers are ahead of the curve in terms of their content knowledge. And also, I think for DC Prep, we're adopting next year Amplify, which is really exciting. And it's a big thing to take on. And I think the more we think about how LEAs experience adoption, it's not just a 1 year, one and done, it is a process. And I think the more supports that can be provided in connection to that at the network level, at the school-based level, the better, especially as we try to make decisions that are grounded in what's best for kiddos.
I love that, Mary. Thank you so much. Dana, our next question is for you. Dana, you're leading an elementary campus, and in your role, I'd love you to talk a bit more about what foundational skills and what trends in literacy you're focusing on, and most especially, what challenges you're seeing and how you're overcoming them. Having worked very closely with your team, one of the things that I believe is a hallmark of success is your willingness to look at something challenging and to figure out a way around it, or to figure out how to pivot from it. So I'd love you to spend some time talking through that for our audience.
Yes, thank you. So right now in early elementary, we focus a lot on foundational reading skills, from phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. And just like Mary and Kevin said, we are a data-driven school. We have assessments at different parts of the year where we take a step back to look and see how our students are performing. And a few of the trends that we're seeing are quite positive. We take our NWEA MAP assessment 3 times a year. And in our last assessment cycle, we saw really great growth with having 60% of our students from K through 3 scoring at or above the 50th percentile. And even in 3rd grade, we had approximately 87% of our students who were meeting their individual growth goal in the winter cycle. And so what that tells us, yes. And so what that tells us is that we are equipping our students with strong foundational skills to send them off prepared and confident to middle school. And all of these success, they don't just come by chance. We do experience a few challenges. And as you know, teachers juggle a lot during a school day. And there are programs that have specific things that we have to accomplish every day. And one of the challenges that could arise is consistency. Without strong routines in a classroom, without a strong culture, pacing can be cut short. And so when people start cutting or snipping parts of lessons, it lessens the designer's intent. And so with that, we are working consistently to build consistency and routines so that the designer's intent can be true for all students and we create access points for all kids.
Thank you so much for that, Dana. I really, really appreciate your willingness to shine a spotlight on both what's working, celebrate that, highlight it, but also to take a really careful look at what's not going as well as you want it to, so that we make sure that we're not having the same conversation again next year or the following year. I have one final question as I close. We've covered a lot of ground this morning, but before we close, I'd love to hear from each of you about one thing that you'd like the audience to walk away with that you didn't yet get a chance to share this morning.
I think the lesson that we continue to learn as a network is we have to balance the technical with the adaptive work. When I say technical, I mean as a network, we're very good at having a schedule. We have systems, we have structures, we have adoption, we have all the right materials. But when you get all of those things in place, the investment of families, of teachers, of leaders is critical. And maintaining that and bringing them through the journey with us has, I think, made the biggest difference as we've made some really intentional shifts. So I would say balancing the technical and all of the structures and systems with just investing key stakeholders.
One thing that I would love for us to take away is that all students can learn how to read. Every student has the ability to be taught specific skills through instruction to be able to learn how to read. And early intervention is key. The sooner we're able to identify any gaps or barriers in how students are learning how to read, the quicker we're able to pivot our instruction, provide instructional supports to create access for all students.
And I think to just build off Dana, especially from a middle school lens, I think we can't be too afraid to say a student is too old or they're too advanced in their academic career to learn those foundational skills. I know from a middle school lens, there was a lot of hesitation about where we teach comprehension, we don't teach decoding. And it's saying actually no, if those gaps exist, we will never hit the comprehension goals, we'll never hit the metrics we want to hit if those students aren't taught the systematic approach to reading that we all know to be true through the science of reading.
Thank you so much to each of you. Please join me in giving a very, very warm thank you to this group for all that they're doing every single day to support our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you again to Dr. Mitchell and to all of our panelists here, both with Aussie and with DC Prep. We really appreciate you showcasing the work underway in DC and also just the great partnership between a state agency and an LEA. I know that Dr. Mitchell mentioned that DC is unique, but still there are so many takeaways for other state agencies on how they can truly partner with their LEA and showcase just tremendous leadership. So thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Now we are going to turn to our spotlight on aligned leadership. The George W. Bush Presidential Center released a report at the end of late last year in 2025 with an analysis on research on reading that really highlighted the economic imperative of improving student outcomes. And so we're really glad to have with us today Robin Berkley, who is the Ann Kimball Johnson Director of Education. And she's here today to share more about their analysis and framework for policy and implementation. So please welcome Robin to the stage.
Hi, good morning. Before I get started, I just want to say I am so honored to be sharing a stage with these incredible practitioners and system leaders from Washington, D.C. As a former resident for 20 years, I am blown away. So can we have one more round of applause for Washington, D.C.? Let's see, can we go to the PowerPoint? Great. Okay, so as you heard, I am the Director of Education at the George W. Bush Presidential Center. For those of you who don't know the Bush Center, we are a nonpartisan institution that seeks to advance freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion through policy solutions and public engagement. So I have to say, one of the things that I love most about working at the Bush Center is that President Bush still very much identifies as an education president, and before that, an education governor. In fact, he decided to run for the governor of Texas because he was deeply troubled that too many children in Texas were moving through school without getting the skills in reading and math that they needed to succeed. That concern, that belief in the essential transformational power of education still runs strong today. More than 20 years later, he and Mrs. Bush still feel a real sense of urgency around this work. And when they saw the 2024 NAEP results, they didn't just see data, they saw a call to action, which is what led us to invite governors from all 50 states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., to the Bush Center for a 2-day off-the-record strategy session this past December. We were joined by a bipartisan group of 12 governors and leaders from 28 states. We engaged in candid conversations with one another and with national experts about what's working, where the pain points are, and how to move forward. We provided each leader, as you heard earlier, with this state-specific briefing packet that included a clear framework for strong reading policy and implementation, an analysis of how their current policies align to that framework, and examples of best practice. We also shared those materials with states that weren't able to attend. Those should have arrived at governor's offices late last week. By the end of the convening, leaders had greater clarity on how to approach reading policy and implementation, recognizing both the complexity of the work and the need for comprehensive approach. It really was a magical couple of days, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that we all left with renewed energy. That while this work is hard and takes time, real progress is possible, and state leadership is the key to making it happen. So we all know, based on state experience and decades of research, that learning reading doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of explicit, deliberate instruction grounded in the science of reading, which includes a focus on phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. The Bush Institute framework focuses on 4 categories of policy and implementation that we believe states must address to improve reading outcomes. Those are educator preparation, ensuring teachers are ready to teach reading on day 1, high quality professional learning and development, helping current educators understand and apply the science of reading in their classrooms, high quality instructional materials, ensuring teachers have access to materials aligned with the science of reading, screening and intervening, identifying struggling readers early and providing aligned supports. I'm not going to spend too much time diving deeply into this framework. It would take way too long, and we have some incredible speakers to move on to after me. I have included that detail on slides. If you want to go back and refer to it later on, please feel free. Also, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Quickly on educator preparation, we're really focused on, has the state established a strong state-led approach requiring programs to align with comprehensive reading standards grounded in the science of reading and provide explicit instruction in foundational reading skills? And does the state hold programs accountable through licensure and publicly reported pass rates? On high quality professional learning and development, does the state require both elementary and middle grade teachers to complete training in evidence-based reading instruction and identify high quality professional learning programs for district adoption? States may also want to consider how they track participation and use data on training and student outcomes to evaluate effectiveness and guide continuous improvement. On high quality instructional materials, does the state promote the use of HQIM, provide guidance and tools for selection, and publicly report district level adoption? And how is the state using outcome data to evaluate curriculum effectiveness and inform continuous improvement? And finally, on screening and intervening, does the state require regular use of universal reading screeners, timely parent notification when students are at risk, and individualized reading plans with targeted supports? So what does this mean for state-level work? Based on NAEP, only about 1/3 of students across the nation can read at grade level. In many states, achievement has been declining for nearly a decade, well before COVID, with the lowest performing students falling the fastest, widening achievement gaps. At the same time, there's a pretty major disconnect between perception and reality. 90% of parents believe that their child is reading at or above grade level, and proficiency, even as proficiency continues to decline. But there's also good news. 42 states have passed science of reading legislation, which means we're shifting our conversation from policy adoption to the far more challenging work of effective implementation. We also know that strong literacy outcomes are foundational to long-term economic growth and workforce readiness in every state, and that voters increasingly view reading as a top priority for state leaders. And of course, there are 36 gubernatorial elections in 2026, likely leadership change in about 20 states. All of these factors point to a critical window of time right now for states to accelerate progress and ensure reforms translate into meaningful outcomes for kids. So before we talk about what states can do at this particular moment in time, I want to unpack just a couple of the research points I just covered. Thanks to Tom Kane, Marty West, and our colleagues at Harvard's Center for Education Policy Research, we know that state leadership plays a critical role in driving student achievement. In states from Florida to Massachusetts to the District of Columbia, sustained and focused state leadership in education has been proven to lead to pretty major gains in student outcomes. And this improved achievement has had real positive impacts on the lives of citizens. In fact, our friends at Harvard found that a 10-point increase in NAEP scores meant a 2.4% increase in annual earnings, a 3.8% increase in college enrollment, and a 23.2% decline in incarceration rates. To put a finer point on it, and I have to tell you this is my favorite slide, it's the one that I think really hits it home, our colleagues at Harvard found that even a 2.4% increase in earnings for every student, for example, in the state of Texas, would generate an additional $165 billion in that state's economy. We also know that voters want state action on reading. This is a winning political issue. As part of the Governor's Forum on Reading, the Bipartisan Policy Center commissioned custom polling to better understand public sentiment. 81% of voters say they would view their state government more favorably if it made improving literacy a top priority. In fact, voters rank reading as one of the most important education issues, second only to school safety. So, with 36 elections looming in the next 8 months, how can states ensure reforms endure through changes in leadership, in budgets, and priorities? We've been thinking about this a lot at the Bush Institute, and I'd like to share a few strategies that we've really been spending some time on. The first is codifying the state's vision and policy by embedding policies in statute or regulation to ensure continuity. Great example here is Ohio, which recently put in place laws that require the state to regularly audit their teacher preparation programs for alignment to the science of reading. The state also has regulations that establish a process for approval, review, and ongoing monitoring, and with the authority to ultimately revoke approval if programs fall short. How can a state build and sustain political will across administrations? Colorado, I think, is a really terrific example here. For over a decade, that state has been doggedly, consistently working on improving reading scores. And they have done this, they've been able to keep this focus thanks to business and civic leaders who have built a bipartisan coalition that links workforce readiness and economic outcomes to economic prosperity in the state, making it meaningful for everyone. We also are thinking about how can states cultivate leadership beyond elected officials with trusted partners who can carry the work through transitions. I think a gold bar standard example here is Tennessee, which, as we all know, has had a consistent focus on reading across 3 different governors, different political parties. Much of this work has been supported by really strong partners like Tennessee SCORE. How can a state design for sustainability by ensuring governance, funding, and implementation systems that endure and expand? Louisiana is one of my favorite examples here. They have put in place a structured process that's codified in law and regulation for reviewing and approving district selection of instructional materials. And finally, how can a state embed reforms in core systems like accountability, certification, and procurement structures? A really creative example I just learned about is out of the state of Mississippi, which is using their contracts requirements to ensure a consistent level of quality among its vendors for training and materials. We're at a moment in time where the challenges seem like a lot, but our opportunities are greater, and our state leadership is so strong. Now is the time for deliberate, strategic, collaborative action. And we at Bush are here to continue to do our part and to support states in this work. If you're interested in learning more about the Governor's Forum, the Bush Institute on Reading Policy and Implementation Framework, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are going to continue our work with state leaders, engaging them to strengthen connections and to engage in shared challenges alongside national experts, and we'd be delighted to invite any state to participate. Thank you so much.